Before we dive in, pause for a moment and tell me something. Where in the world are you watching from, and what time is it right now? Maybe it's sunrise in Nairobi, midnight in New York, afternoon in Canada, or evening in France. Don't just watch quietly, drop a comment below and let's see how far this story reaches across the world. Now, lean in and let's begin. The rope scraped Armand Valade's neck like dry grass against raw skin. He stood on the scaffold in Sainte-Madeleine Gulch with wrists cinched tight, boots planted on a trapdoor that trembled under every breath. Dust hung gold in the early light, and a hush rode the street as if even the wind feared to speak. Sheriff Etienne Mercier faced him from below, eyes hard as river stones, star glinting on his vest. And beside the sheriff stood Maël, dark hair pinned back, blue dress dusted by the trail, his secret, his undoing, the reason he'd walked out of the hills and into handcuffs. The town watched. The bell tolled once. He had bled for worse things than a plank and a length of hemp. He had survived the Mons Brisé winters, a bullet lodged near his shoulder, and the hunger that made men bite their tongues. But he had not survived her. Maël's gaze found his, and the world narrowed to a thread pulled taut between them. Armand mouthed her name. She shook her head the slightest bit, begging him to be still. The deputy, Thibault Lemaine, read the charge: murder at Murray Creek. Armand knew the name they whispered as proof: Lucien Perrault, the rancher who once wore Maël's ring. He could have shouted the truth. He could have named the man who paid for death, the silk-gloved railroad baron Auguste Villon, and the dog who fired the first shot. He could have told them how men like Villon built gallows with money and lies instead of wood. But if he did, the baron's men would turn their rifles toward the woman beneath the steps. He tasted iron and swallowed it. Silence would be his last trade. Sheriff Mercier's jaw flexed. Any last words? His voice carried up the posts. Armand lifted his chin. He pictured the cabin by Coeur de Sable Ridge, the smell of cedar, the way Maël warmed her hands over the stove and laughed without sound, shoulders shaking. He wanted to tell them love is not a shield, it is a lantern that draws wolves. He wanted to tell Maël to run. Only this, he said softly. Whatever you think I am, I chose you. Murmurs rippled. The lever creaked. A figure moved at the edge of the crowd, shawl pulled low, basket on her arm. Maël stepped forward, eyes bright and fixed. As Sheriff Mercier raised his hand to give the sign, she lifted her face and spoke, not to the law, but to Armand. Don't be afraid. He held her gaze. From the livery roof, a flash, sun on steel, then the whip crack of a rifle. The gallows rope jerked and frayed. People screamed. The platform shuddered. Armand felt the trapdoor shift, and in the chaos, someone shoved through the crowd toward the steps with a key glinting in their fist. Months earlier, snow melted off the Mons Brisés, and the river ran green and loud. Armand had lived like a ghost then, trapping up near Éperdu Pass, avoiding the trails where posters bore his face from a foolish young raid he scarcely remembered. He kept away from Sainte-Madeleine Gulch, from its church bell and its clean-swept porches, from the kind of life you must explain. But hunger and a broken snare set dragged him down to trade. He meant to leave pockets full and mouth shut. He met her at the well. Maël Mercier carried a pail with both hands, knuckles white, a widow's black ribbon tied at her nape. She offered him a nod, a stranger's kindness, then noticed the lift of his shoulder where an old bullet gnawed at bone. "You're bleeding," she said. He glanced down. A fresh snag from the brush had made a mess. She pressed her handkerchief into his palm without asking his name. "The schoolhouse has bandages," she added. "No questions." I've had enough of questions for a lifetime. Armand followed her to the schoolhouse painted a brave blue against the prairie. The room smelled of chalk and pine oil, of children who would pile in come Monday with skinned knees and hollow stomachs and big, unafraid eyes. As she cleaned his wound, he saw a thin gold band on a ribbon tucked into her bodice. "You're married," he said, and her hands paused. "Was." She tied the bandage, neat and sure. Lucien Perrault died on the North Road. Bandits. She did not look away. Half this town thinks the road killed him. The other half thinks God did. The truth is simpler, men did. He returned the handkerchief, blood-stained now. "I'm sorry." He meant it. Something inside him twisted, old and sore as a winter scar. The poster in his pocket felt heavier than a stone. He wanted to leave before the bell rang and filled the room with children, yet he found himself asking about the North Road, about the shape of the tracks, about the bullets dug from Lucien's coat. She answered, quiet and tired, the way you speak when words are just legs that have walked too far. That night, he camped by Maris Creek, his fire small, his mind loud. He told himself she was the sheriff's daughter, the one woman in town he should never even look at, much less think about. But when dawn pushed pink through the cottonwoods, he carved a toy horse from a scrap of cedar and left it on the schoolhouse step. No note, no name. And then he walked back into the hills, swearing he would not return. He kept that promise for 6 days. On the 7th day, the wind carried smoke, sharp, tarry, wrong. Armand smelled it before he saw the glow along Coeur de Sable Ridge. He ran the goat track toward town and found the old grain warehouse lit like a sun at midnight, sparks climbing the sky. Buckets passed hand to hand, but the fire was a hungry thing and would not be reasoned with. Children coughed. Someone shouted that the schoolhouse might go next. He saw Maëlle, hair unpinned, face streaked with ash, shepherding small bodies away from the flames. She slipped on a loose plank. Thibault Lemaine caught her elbow and held too long, lips close to her ear. Armand's jaw tightened. He told himself to keep walking. Instead, he grabbed a tarp, soaked it, and flung it over a swinging ember shower. A wall sagged. He braced it with a beam until his arm shook and his vision starred. The wall held. When he staggered back, Maëlle was there, pressing a wet rag to his mouth. "You shouldn't be here," she whispered. "Your wanted posters didn't burn. You sound like your father." He coughed. "Is he here?" She glanced toward the jailhouse. It's light dark. "He's riding the South Trail." "Ambush rumor. He'll come back angry." She lifted her chin with that quiet defiance he'd seen at the well. "They think I should marry again. Quickly. A woman alone is a door half open to wolves, they say. Thibault visits with flowers he can't afford. The rag trembled in her hand. I promised Lucien I'd keep the school running. I promised myself I'd choose when I'm ready." Armand nodded. In the leaping light, he saw the cost of every promise she'd made. The red line of grief around her eyes, the way she stood between the flames and the smallest children, as if her body were a wall built for others. He felt a low, stubborn thing in his chest, loyalty maybe or shame, that sharpened his voice. "Maëlle," he said, "those men on the North Road, I think I know whose hands trained them." She stilled. "Say his name." Armand swallowed. "Auguste Vian." The name tasted like ash. Vian, with his silver watch and hired blades, built tracks across other people's lives. He paid for fear the way other men paid for wheat. Armand had run with boys who did Vian's dirty work once, young and stupid and hungry. He had walked away when he saw the ledger mattered more than blood. But walking away doesn't erase footprints. He looked at Maëlle. If I'm right, the proof lies where Murray Creek bends. You should not come. She held his gaze. Then I will. Night stitched the plains, star by bright star. They rode small and quiet along the creek, Armand leading, Maëlle behind on a gray mare she handled like she was born to it. At the bend, the banks showed scars, hoof gouges, a splintered sapling, a boot print half filled with mud. Armand knelt and traced a circle around a spent cartridge. Vaillant's men load these, he said. They polish brass until it shines like his buttons. Maëlle crouched beside him, breath white in the cool. Then we bring this to my father. He hesitated. Mercier wants me in a cell, not at his desk. She slipped the cartridge into a handkerchief. He wants truth more than pride. He taught me that a coyote yipped far off. Armand's eyes swept the dark. We're not alone. A twig snapped. Maëlle's hand went to the mare's neck. A shadow stood up from the tall grass, a man with a scarf over his mouth and a rifle notched to his shoulder. Walk away, the man said. This is railroad land. Armand rose slow, palms open. Law says water belongs to all. He took a step sideways, drawing the rifle barrel with him. You wore a red scarf on the North Road. The man spat. I wore what I'm paid to wear. The rifle swung toward Maëlle. Armand moved between them, and in that heartbeat he saw a choice, run and live, or stand and tie himself forever to a woman whose name would be danger from that day forward. He didn't feel noble. He felt cornered by the truth that had chased him from the mountains to this bend in a muddy creek. He lunged. The rifle cracked, burning his shoulder with a hot slap. He tackled the man into the grass. Fists found faces. Teeth split skin. The rifle spun away and fell into the creek with a hiss. Maëlle grabbed a fallen branch and brought it down hard. The man sagged. Armand rolled off him, breath shuddering. You shouldn't have done that, he said, half a laugh. You're bleeding again, she answered, not laughing at all. A lantern bobbed on the trail. More men coming, voices low and sure as a prayer. Maëlle looked from Armand to the shadows rolling toward them. We can't outrun 4, she said. Then we don't, Armand answered, pulling her toward the cottonwoods. We vanish. Behind the trees lay an old root-cellar door he had used as a boy. He pulled it open, and as the first boots reached the bank, they slid into the dark. Dawn painted Saint Madeleine with a thin smile that fooled nobody. Word moved faster than horses. The sheriff's daughter had been seen in the company of a mountain thief. Thibault's bouquet was found trampled near the school fence. Auguste Vaillant had breakfasted with the bank manager and left him pale. Gossip walked in boots and church shoes and aprons. By noon, Maëlle was a storm story. Sheriff Mercier returned, eyes tired, and heard 10 versions of 9 lies before he found his daughter. She stood on the schoolhouse steps with her pupils lined like ducks behind her. Dust coated her boots. Papa, she said. And he heard the girl who chased frogs at Petite Mare Creek, not the woman who had buried a husband. He wanted to ask why there was blood on her sleeve. He wanted to ask where she had been last night. Instead, he asked, Are you safe? She nodded, and that should have soothed him. It did not. In the jailhouse, Thibault shoved a poster across the desk. We could end this, he said. Armand Valade is a ghost we can catch. Mercier studied the sketch. Sharp cheekbones, a mouth set hard against the world. He had seen eyes like that in the mirror after Maëlle's mother died. Sometimes a ghost has reasons, the sheriff said. Thibault bristled. He has Maëlle's attention, sir. People will talk. They already do, Mercier answered. The question is whether they have reason. He turned the poster over, and there someone had scrawled a single word, V-I-O-N. By evening, Vian himself stood in the doorway with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Sheriff," he purred, "I hear an outlaw disrupts your daughter's peace. Allow me to help. I employ men who can find troublesome shadows." Mercier's hand hovered near the star on his chest. "The law will handle the law." Vian tipped his hat with a gloved finger. "Of course. But remember, order keeps the trains on time, and trains keep bread on tables. A daughter's reputation can be repaired. A town's economy cannot." He left the scent of cigar and threat behind. That night, Maëlle and Armand met in the empty church, candles guttering. She told him what the town said, and did not cry. He told her the names of 3 men who rode for Vian, and how one carried a watch engraved with a P for Perrault. "Proof," she whispered. "We need proof." He reached for her hand and stopped, palm inches from fingers he craved, because touching was a promise the dark would not let them keep without cost. Outside, footsteps halted at the church door. Thibault's voice came low through the wood. "Maëlle? Are you there?" She squeezed the air where his hand would have been and mouthed one word: "Hide." They hid behind the altar, breath shallow, while Thibault's boots crossed the nave. He stood at Maëlle's desk, the place where she taught catechism to children who swung their feet under benches, and traced a finger along the smooth wood. "Father Pierre says you've been absent," he called. "The town worries." "I worry." He set a small packet on the desk, sugared almonds, ribboned. "I brought these from Belfont. To sweeten your days," silence answered. Thibault's voice cooled. "I saw you ride with him." Behind the altar, Armand's hands curled. Maëlle touched his wrist, a quiet knife of warning against his skin. Thibault moved to the candles and pinched them out one by one, petals of light folding. At the last flame he paused. "If you're here," he said softly, "know this. I would kill him for you. I would jail him for you. I would marry you to save you from the tongues of this town." The last candle died. His boots turned. The door creaked. He left the almonds and the threat. They exhaled into the dark. Armand whispered, "He loves you." "He loves the idea of me," she answered. "It looks good beside a badge." She picked up the almonds, set them back on the desk, and struck a new match. The small flame made a brave circle. "If Thibault saw me ride with you, Vian will know by sundown. We need to move faster." Armand nodded. "The watch with the P. I know where that man sleeps when he comes to town." Maëlle lowered the match, eyes steady. "Then tonight we steal a watch and a future." They waited for the moon to climb before leaving the church. Outside, the street was a mouth holding its breath. Armand led her down the alley between the livery and the blacksmith's, past a barrel where cats sorted the day's leavings. He counted windows, shadows, habits learned the hard way. At the back of the boarding house, a crate leaned under a sill. He lifted it without sound. She climbed, light and sure, and slipped her knife between latch and frame. The window raised like a sigh. Inside, the room smelled of whiskey and cologne. A man snored, heavy as a wagon. On the washstand sat the watch, silver, clean enough to see your soul in, if you still had one. Maëlle reached. The floorboard squeaked. The snore caught. Armand's hand shot out, steadying the board with his weight. She took the watch, and in that same breath the man rolled over, mumbling. They froze until his breathing fell slow again. Then they were at the window, in the alley, running. They didn't stop until they reached the cottonwoods at Marais Creek and the old root cellar that had saved them once. Inside, by lantern light, Maëlle opened the case. The backplate bore an engraving, A V to R P, Auguste Vian to Roule Perrin. Beneath, a date matched the week Lucien died. In the lining, a scrap of paper. Figures, initials, a note. North Road secured. Proof. Real as blood. Maëlle clutched the watch and looked at Armand as if he were the first honest sky after a month of storms. "We have him," she said. Armand nodded, but the lantern shook in his hand. "Then we have to live long enough to tell it." Morning brought a bruised sky and a whisper that rattled doors. Vian's men were riding in, and they were not wearing smiles. The children arrived at the schoolhouse with their slates and fears. Maëlle tucked the watch into a book, locked the drawer, and called the lesson on multiplication, as if numbers could shield small bones. She wrote on the board with a steady hand, while her heart galloped like a spooked colt. Armand watched from the hill by the cemetery, a place for quiet men and bad decisions. He had 3 bullets and a knife and a shoulder that ached when the wind changed. He could vanish into the hills and leave the town to its fate. He could, he didn't. He scanned for riders, counting 4. He recognized Rule Perrin by the way he sat a horse, tilted like a man who mistrusted the earth. Behind them, 2 more dust trails, Thibault's posse and the sheriff's. The day was about to pick a side. In town, Vian's men dismounted loose and lazy, like cats in a room full of birds. They went first to the bank, then to the jailhouse, then to the school. Children's faces pressed the panes. Maëlle met them on the steps, head high, blue dress mended at the hem where life had chewed it. "School is in session," she said. "You'll take your business elsewhere." Rule smiled with half his mouth. "We're here for a watch, madame." A gift from a friend. He tipped his hat as if he spoke to a queen, and not a woman he meant to frighten. Thibault arrived, reins smoking, posse behind him, badge bright. He placed himself between Maëlle and the men like a door slammed hard. "You'll turn right around," he said. Rule's hand drifted near his belt. "We only need what we lost." Shouts rose. Bankers, mothers, boys who wanted to be men. Sheriff Mercier rode in from the west. Dust haloed around him. He took in the school, his daughter, the men with soft hands and hard eyes. "Lower your guns," he ordered. "Everyone." Silence held for a long breath, 2, 3. Then Rule's smile died. "Sheriff," he said, "you're protecting a thief." "That watch belongs to my employer." "It belongs to the man you killed," Maëlle said, voice clear. She stepped forward before anyone could stop her and placed the watch in her father's palm. "Read the back." He did. The town watched his face change, each line drawing a new line of war. He raised his eyes to Rule. "You'll come with me." Rule began to laugh. "I will," he said softly. "But I don't think your outlaw will." He jerked his chin toward the hill, where Armand stood outlined against the sky. Guns turned toward the ridge. Armand felt the weight of every gaze like stones in a pack. He had hoped to live in the shadows of this fight. Vian's men had other plans. Rule swung into the saddle with a lazy grace, as if he had all day to ride a man down and cut a town apart. Sheriff Mercier raised a hand. "Nobody fires," he warned. "Not one shot in front of those children." The wind answered first, carrying the scent of rain. Then someone's nerve snapped like a dry twig. A rifle barked from a window. Dirt spat at Armand's boots. He moved. The cemetery stones made odd cover, men's names becoming shields. He dropped behind a marble cross and counted beats, the way he'd learned to breathe when mountains tried to squeeze life out of lungs. He fired once, clean, and a rider's hat sailed into the air. He didn't want to kill. He wanted time. Vian's men split, one flanking left toward the cottonwoods, the other weaving through headstones like a black ribbon. Down in town, Maëlle shepherded her students under their desks, whispering the alphabet because the brain can use any rope when the river is high. Thibaut made a choice that would cost him. He left the steps, vaulted into his saddle, and charged uphill alone, pistol up. He wanted a story where he was the hero and the outlaw died. Armand saw him coming, and saw the foolish courage shining like a lantern in fog. He could shoot Thibaut and end the problem of a jealous man. He could. He put a bullet into the dirt by the deputy's horse instead. The horse reared. Thibaut tumbled. Armand ran, grabbed his collar and rolled him behind a stone as lead chewed the grass. "Stay down," Armand growled, "or die standing like a fool." Thibaut's eyes widened. "You saved me." "I saved the town from your bad aim," Armand said. Another crack, another puff of dirt close enough to kiss his ear. He yanked the deputy's pistol from his grip and slid it across the stone so it pointed at the proper direction. "Shoot only when you see eyes," he said. Thibaut swallowed. "Why?" "Because she loves you enough to mourn you," Armand answered, and hated how much truth the words carried. Below them, Sheriff Mercier and Roule circled each other with law and sin for spurs. Rain chose its moment, hard and sudden. The first drops struck hot barrels and hissed. Smoke thinned. Horses screamed. In the blur, a figure broke from the cottonwoods with a rifle, likely meant for Armand's back. Maëlle stepped into the open between town and hill, dress plastered to her legs, and lifted both arms. "Enough!" she cried to the sky, to men, to God. The sound froze them. A teacher's command sharpened by grief. For a heartbeat, nobody fired. In that gap, Armand saw the truth of his own life as clear as if written on a school slate. This ends only one way. He stood up to end it sooner. He slid down the hill, hands raised, pistol tossed into the wet grass. Guns followed him like eyes. Sheriff Mercier moved to meet him, jaw set. Thibaut shouted from behind a stone to hold fire. Roule's mouth curled. "Smart," the killer said. "A man who knows when to bend." "I'm done bending," Armand answered. He faced the sheriff and the woman he loved and the town that would write his name in mud or stone. "I'll come in." "If you take them," he nodded toward Roule, "and lock them where fear can't buy keys." Mercier weighed him as if he were a sack of grain. "Confess to Mares Creek," the sheriff said. "Tell me you pulled the trigger." "I didn't," Armand said. "But I'll wear it if it keeps your daughter breathing." Maëlle made a small sound, like glass tipping in a cupboard. "No." He didn't look at her because looking would break him. "You'll never hold Vian on a watch," Armand said. "But you can hold me on a lie big enough to satisfy a town. While they watch my neck, you can look for a rope that fits him." Thibaut stood, rain streaking his face like tears he would not admit. "It's not right," he said, voice breaking on the edge of a boy. Mercier's eyes flicked to him, then to his daughter, then to the town where fear peered through curtains. "Right is a thing we chase," he said roughly. "Sometimes we run out of road." He took Armand's wrists and snapped the cuffs himself. Roule laughed and clapped like a man at a theater. "Bravo! A tidy resolution." He mounted, rain silvering his hat brim. "We'll send flowers." Maëlle stepped forward, hands out. "Papa," she said, "you can't." "I must," he answered. "If I don't, this place tears itself to pieces." She looked at Armand then, and in her eyes he saw not a plea, but a vow. He nodded once, fast, as if they shared a language nobody else knew. The sheriff led him away. The town exhaled, the way you do when a fever breaks, not because you are better, but because the body surrenders. Behind them, Vion's men vanished into rain. In the cell, the iron smelled like old blood and water. Armand sat on the cot and watched a spider repair its web in the window corner. Thibault lingered at the bars, shame raw on his face. "If I could change it," he said, "I would." Armand looked at him until Thibault looked away. "Then change what you can," Armand said. "Follow rule. Find the ledger where he writes his sins. Bring it to the sheriff before the rope finds my throat." Thibault swallowed. "Why should I help you?" "You shouldn't," Armand said. "Help her." Footsteps sounded on the boardwalk. Mail, with a shawl and a key she shouldn't have had. She reached through the bars and took his hand. "I won't let them end you for their comfort," she whispered. "You can't stop a storm by telling it no," he answered. "Then I'll move the people," she said, fierce and low, "one by one if I must." He wanted to kiss her hand. He settled for pressing his knuckles to his brow as if that could write her into his bones. Outside, thunder rolled. Inside, the spider finished its web, perfect and doomed. Thibault rode into the night like a man who had been told the map lies. He followed mud and rumor, a thin line of clues running from Sainte-Madeleine to a roadhouse called Le Sablier, where men paid extra to drink where the clocks had no hands. He asked after Rule and got shrugs that smelled of fear. He showed his badge and got smiles that meant nothing. He waited until dawn and then kicked in the cellar door. Racks of wine, crates marked with Vion's initials, and a box with a false bottom. Sloppy work done by a man who believed money was its own lock. Thibault pried it up and found the ledger. Names, dates, amounts, notes in a neat hand that wouldn't blot even while boys bled onto the margins. North Road secured, Perot silenced. Sheriff managed. He swallowed bile. Managed. He thought of Mercier, of a good man's face learning it had been turned like a wheel by a hand in a velvet glove. He hid the ledger under his coat and stepped back into a dawn that looked ashamed of itself. 2 riders waited, shadows cut from the light. Rule Perrin smiled like a blade. "Deputy," he said. "Leaving so soon?" Thibault considered drawing where he stood and dying the kind of death men would call brave and stupid. He chose a different bravery. He turned his horse into the scrub and rode as if wolves wanted his heart for breakfast. Bullets snapped branches near his ear. He tucked low and prayed to the God his mother loved and he had ignored. Back in Sainte-Madeleine, Maëlle turned the schoolhouse into a court of public opinion. She read from the Catechism of Evidence, the watch, the engraving, the pattern of boots at Murray Creek. Mothers listened with arms crossed. Fathers frowned. Boys nodded like dogs who hear their names in any sentence. "They will hang Armand," she said, and her voice wavered only once. "Or we can hang silence." She stabbed the chalk at the board. "Which do you prefer?" The door banged open. Thibault stumbled in, gray with dust and fear, and laid the ledger on her desk. "Choose neither," he gasped. "Choose justice." Sheriff Mercier arrived on the same breath, slammed the door against the weather in the town, and stared at the book like a snake he didn't want to touch but must. He opened it. Read turned a page. Read. When he looked up, he was older, and something in him had been set on fire that water would not put out. He closed the ledger. "Armand will have a trial," he said, "and Vion will have a reckoning." Outside, a train whistle bled through the morning, like a promise made by a liar. They moved benches into the church and called it a courtroom because the jail was too small to hold everything that needed saying. Father Pierre placed a hand on the altar and told God he would have to share. The town filed in, hats off, eyes on the floorboards where secrets collect. Armand stood at the front between 2 deputies, hair combed as if combing could turn a man into something people liked better. The judge rode in from Belfont, stiff and sure, a man who had never missed a dinner. Vian sat in the back pew, silk gleaming, smile a painted thing. Sheriff Mercier read the charges, then read the parts of the ledger he could stomach reading aloud. Murmurs rolled like thunder in a far valley. Rule did not attend. Men like him prefer alleys to aisles. Thibault stood, throat tight, and told how he found the book. He did not call himself brave. He didn't need to. The pages did it for him. When it was Maelle's turn, she rose with the poise of a queen in a room full of debt. She held up the watch. "This belonged to my husband's killer," she said. Not to the man the town decided to hate. She met every eye that would meet hers. "If you hang Armand Valade, you will not be safer. You will just be wrong in public." The judge frowned over his spectacles, annoyed by any truth that made order messy. He called for the defense to speak for the accused. Armand stepped forward. He didn't give them a speech. He gave them a boy with cold hands and a hungry family, the mountain winter that taught him how to steal, the gang he left without saying goodbye, the days he hid in the ridge and wished he were a better man. He gave them the night at Mares Creek and his choice to run toward a rifle instead of away from a woman. He did not say, "Love." He didn't need to. It hung in the air like a bell after it tolls. The judge cleared his throat and arranged his papers. "Evidence is strong against Mr. Vian's employees," he said carefully, as if words might explode. "Questions remain about Mr. Valade's presence at several crimes in years past. He eyed Armand, then the town, then the man in silk who had never missed dinner. I will render judgment tomorrow." Vian rose, dabbed the corner of his mouth with a white square, and bowed slightly, as if to an opera he enjoyed more than most. The church doors opened to the evening. Men spilled out to argue their souls. Maelle remained, one hand on the pew, as if steadying herself against a ship's tilt. "Tomorrow," she whispered to Armand, and made the word a prayer. Tomorrow did not wait its turn. It sent men with scarves over faces and knives that did not glint because they were meant for darkness. They came through the alley like a secret, and through the back of the jail like a promise not kept. The first deputy fell without a sound. The second found his voice and lost it to a fist. Armand woke to the taste of cloth and the smell of lamp oil. Rule bent over him, eyes bright. "We'll fix your trial," he said, "with a rope." They dragged him into the street, quiet as a funeral, because funerals are for the living. The clouds hid the moon. The town slept like it trusted tomorrow to be kind. At the corner by the schoolhouse, a lantern bobbed and paused. Maelle. She took in the scene, scarves, knives, the man they wanted to erase, and made a choice faster than fear could finish its sentence. She ran at the man closest to her and drove her knee into his thigh. He folded with an oath. The others turned. Rule laughed. "She does love you," he said, and pulled a pistol. Before he could raise it, a shotgun's racked growl split the night. Sheriff Mercier stepped out of the shadow holding the old scattergun he kept for wolves. "Let him go," he said, "or I'll paint the street with a great many regrets." Rule weighed odds and found them even for once. He dropped Armand's arm and smiled. "We'll see you at dawn." They slipped back into the alley as slick as eels. Mercier lowered the gun and looked at his daughter. "You can't keep saving him," he said. "I can try," she answered, voice ragged. "Until it's your turn to save him." They hustled Armand back into the cell. The sheriff locked the door and stepped away as if bars could keep out a tide. He rubbed his face with both hands. "I can't outshoot money," he said. "I can't outshout fear. But I can do one thing." He turned, eyes steady. I can stand in the doorway until they learn they have to go through me." He looked at our mom. "If you love her, make it mean something more than this town's gossip." Our ma nodded, throat tight, and wondered what love meant when a rope had your name on it. In the morning, the judge would speak, and the town would listen, and the train would keep its schedule because iron does not care about men. That night, Maëlle leaned against the bars and told Armand about a far place she had never seen. Normandy, where her mother once lived, where cliffs met a sea that did not forgive fools, but could turn a heart peaceful if you sat long enough. He listened, and let the sound of her voice build him a shore he could not reach. When she left, the night pressed in, the way knights do when they believe they will win. Dawn dragged its feet, as if it feared what it would find when it arrived. The judge sat at the altar, papers neat. The town filled the church again, because hope is stubborn, even when it has been shown the exit. Sheriff Mercier placed the ledger on the table like a sword. Vion's chair was empty. Men whispered. Maëlle felt the air on her skin like nettles, and thought, if he doesn't show, the judge will say the word again. Questions. He showed. Auguste Vion entered with the confidence of a man who had paid for the floor to be this clean. He took a seat near the front and crossed his legs, glove fingertips on his knee. The judge adjusted his spectacles. "Mr. Vion," he said, "you are named in this ledger." "I am named everywhere," Vion replied smoothly. "On deeds, on charities, on the hearts of men who find their dinners because of my rails." He smiled at the town. "This is a misunderstanding." The judge read the entries that cut closest to bone. Perot silenced. The room tightened. North Road secured. Someone's breath hitched. Vion's smile did not tremble. "I cannot answer to the scribbles of a bitter employee," he said. "He writes my initials like a child scrawls a hero's name. As for Mr. Valade, I bear him no ill will. If he is guilty, let the law hang him. If not, let the law tidy him away somewhere safe." The word safe scraped Maëlle's ears. She saw the plan. Exile dressed as mercy. The judge cleared his throat. In light of the ledger, the watch, and testimony, the court finds insufficient proof that Mr. Valade murdered Lucien Perot. However, the word fell like a rock into a pond. His prior crimes and associations warrant punishment. He will be transported to the state prison at Saint-Armand for a term of 10 years. Gasps, whispers, relief, and anger braided. Maëlle's hands found the pew and gripped. 10 years is a kind of death that teaches you to count slowly. Armand lifted his head. 10 years, and he would come back gray, if he came back at all. He looked at Maëlle and saw her mouth form a word he pretended was wait, not why. Sheriff Mercier's shoulders sagged in a way only his daughter saw. Vion stood, pleased. "A wise compromise," he said. He turned to leave and found Thibault in his path, badge bright. "You are under arrest," the deputy said, voice loud enough for the rafters, "on suspicion of conspiracy to commit murder." Laughter rippled. Someone shushed it because the deputy's eyes were not joking. The judge's face pinched. "On what grounds?" Thibault set a small folded paper atop the ledger. "On this." The judge unfolded it. A note, torn from the ledger's back, in Vion's own tidy hand. A private memo to R.P. promising a gratuity for closing a mouth near Marais Creek. The room drew in breath like a creature. Vion's smile finally cracked. Sheriff Mercier stepped to his side, cuffs ready. "You'll come quietly," he said. Vion's hand darted to his pocket. A knife glinted. Mercier moved faster. The knife clattered. Men surged. Someone screamed. In the confusion, Rule's face flashed at the door and vanished. The judge pounded the altar with his palm. "Order!" he cried, but order had fled. They put Vian in a cell and Armand in chains. Justice has two speeds, and both felt wrong. The judge insisted the sentence stand until a higher court ruled on Vian. "We cannot let the guilty go because the guiltier got caught," he said, tidy as ever. Sheriff Mercier looked like a man trying to shovel out a barn with a teaspoon. He escorted his daughter to the platform where the prison coach would couple to the noon train. The town gathered, hats in hands, sorrow dressed up as civic pride. Armand stood by the wagon, wrists bound, flanked by guards sent from Belfont, who looked at Sainte-Madeleine like a place where their boots might catch something. Maëlle walked to him as if the earth might break between them and swallow the words she needed to say. She touched his cheek with her fingers through the bars of the wagon gate. 10 years, she said. I'll wait 10 lifetimes. He wanted to tell her not to. He wanted to tell her to marry a man who could give her a quiet porch and a fat cat and a garden that grew without tragedy. He said nothing. Her eyes made it hard to be wise. Thibault stood a few paces off, face still young enough to learn. He watched the couple and felt the ache of what envy turns into when it grows up. Respect. He approached and cleared his throat. Rule will try something, he said to the sheriff. He doesn't like loose ends. Mercier nodded. Then we cut his string first. He gave Armand a look that carried too many words for a train platform. I'll do what I can with the judge. If Vian falls, you'll have a chance. Armand inclined his head. Guard your back, he said. Men like Rule shoot where a badge meets a shirt. The whistle blew. The guards hustled Armand up the wagon steps. Maëlle walked alongside as far as she could, hand brushing iron. Right, she said, if they let you. Right, even if they don't. Right in your head so you don't forget your own voice. He tried to smile. The train lurched, the wagon rolled. She jogged, then ran, then stopped because the platform stopped and the world did not. She stood with her palm up, empty, until the dust settled onto it like ash. On the ridge above the tracks a man lay with a rifle, calm as a winter pond. Rule Perrin sighted down the barrel, breathed in, breathed out, and let the crosshairs rest where love met law. He squeezed. The shot cracked, echoing across the flats. Down on the platform, Sheriff Mercier staggered, badge suddenly bright with blood. The town screamed, the wagon jerked, the guards cursed. Mel turned toward her father, toward the sound, toward the way a life ends without asking permission. On the ridge, Rule slid back like a snake into grass. They carried Sheriff Mercier into the schoolhouse because it was close and clean and had seen enough tears to understand. Father Pierre tore linen. Thibault pressed his hands against the wound, muttering things he meant for God and got for air. Maëlle knelt by her father's shoulder, hair fallen loose. Stay, she told him. Just stay. He managed a crooked smile. Bossy, he whispered, like your mother. His blood soaked her dress in a starburst that would never wash out, no matter how she scrubbed. On the tracks, the train ground to a halt, because engines answered to the sound of death like everything else. Armand braced his foot and wrenched against the cuffs until skin split. The Belfont guards swore and shoved him back. He stared at the schoolhouse door as if staring could hold a life in place. Let me say goodbye, he said. 1 minute. Prisoners don't get minutes, the older guard replied. They get schedules. Armand met his eyes with a look that had moved wolves. The guard looked away and spat. 30 seconds, he muttered. Then I never saw you. Armand hit the steps as Maëlle's shoulders sagged, relief and fear at war across her face. The sheriff's breath was shallow but present. I told you to guard your back, Armand said, tone too gentle for a man in irons. Mercier huffed a laugh that hurt. I prefer advice delivered before bullets. His hand searched and found their clasped fingers, his daughter's and the outlaw's. He squeezed hard. "Listen to me," he rasped. "I chased right all my life and sometimes found it. Today, right is this: you keep her safe, even if it costs you everything." Maëlle shook her head, tears sharp. "No," she said, "no more costs. We are finished paying." Mercier looked at her with the quiet pride of a man who had raised a storm and called her daughter. "Right isn't a bill," he said. "It's a direction." He turned his eyes to Armand. "Go." The word was a command and a blessing. Thibault hesitated a breath, then pressed a small ring of keys into Armand's palm under the cloth. "Make it mean something," he whispered. Outside, the guard shouted that time was up, the train was leaving, the world had places to be. Inside, Armand kissed Maëlle's forehead, a quick, desperate benediction, and then moved like a man who had remembered he was good at leaving. He slipped through the back, down the alley, over the fence, into the narrow vein of shadow between the smithy and the stable where horses dream of grass. He ran toward the ridge, not away, toward Rouen. The Mons Brises held wind like a secret, letting it loose in sudden fists. Armand climbed the goat trail with blood drying on his wrist from the cuffs and a promise pounding behind his ribs. He tracked Rouen by the marks men can't help but leave when they think they are wolves: crushed thyme, a scuffed stone, the faint, sweet stink of gun oil. He moved low, breath steady, eyes greedy for edges. The ridge had raised him. It had taught him to hear the way a hawk falls out of silence. He found the nest near two twisted pines where boys used to dare each other to spit at the wind and not flinch. Rouen crouched by a small fire, roasting meat and humming, as if he had not killed men and tried to kill hope. Armand stepped into the clearing without a sound, gun leveled. "Stand," he said. Rouen did, slow, hands out like a dancer. "You got fast," he drawled. "Love makes men clumsy." "Not you." Armand said nothing. Words are a kind of waste when the air is this thin. "Going to kill me?" Rouen asked lightly. "In cold blood?" "Sheriff's daughter won't love that I'm not killing you," Armand said. "You're going to walk into town and stand before Judge Paper and say exactly what you did on the North Road." Rouen laughed. "Or what?" "Or I loosen your wrists until you can feel your fingers," Armand said, "and then I make you wish you couldn't." The wind shifted, and the fire leaned, and the mountain reminded them both that men are small. Roule's smile crooked. "You got a witness?" he asked, eyes flicking past Armand's shoulder. Armand didn't look. He listened. He heard a breath too careful to be a bird. He stepped sideways, gun still on Rouen, and spoke to the trees. "You picked the wrong pine, Thibault." A curse. The deputy stumbled into view, face flamed with embarrassment and the need to belong. "I had to come," he blurted. "If you kill him, the trial will die with him." "If he kills you, she will." Armand's mouth twitched. "Then nobody kills anybody." Not today. He disarmed Rouen with a move he'd learned chasing rabbits as a boy, fast and ugly, and tied his hands with his own belt. Thibault bound his ankles. "We carry him?" the deputy asked. "He'll scream," Armand said. "Let him." Let the mountain learn his name so it can forget it later. They hauled Rouen off the ridge like a deer that had stolen a gun. He cursed, threatened, promised. The ridge swallowed his words and gave them back as echoes that made him sound small. At the foot of the hill, 3 riders waited, hats low, pistols high. Belfont guards. "Prisoners," their sergeant barked. "Return, Mr. Valade to custody." Armand looked at Thibault. "Choose," he said simply. The deputy's jaw clenched. He lifted his badge with one hand and his pistol with the other. "These men are under jurisdiction of Sainte-Madeleine," he said. "Step aside." The sergeant smiled, not nicely. "Make me." Thibault fired into the dirt at the horse's feet. The animal reared. The sergeant cursed. For a breath, the world balanced on a knife. Law against law, love against duty, men against the easy slide into fear. They brought rule into town at noon when the street was fullest, and lies were hardest to tell without bumping into someone's mother. Father Pierre rang the bell, not for mass but for judgment. Sheriff Mercier, pale but standing, leaned on Thibault's arm and nodded to Armand as if to a man who had finally done something worthy of the pain he carried. Maëlle met them at the steps, hand over the place where her father's blood had dried on her dress. She did not look away from Rule. "Say it," she commanded. He spat first, because men like him always try spit before truth. Then he spoke. He told them about the North Road, about the pistol that coughed once and then twice, about Lucien Perrault's surprise, about the handbag with money for teacher's chalk that went to a bottle in Bellefonte instead. He said Vion's name and made it sound ordinary. The town listened and learned the shape of the hole they had walked around on purpose for a year. The judge wrote fast, as if catching lies was like hunting butterflies. Vion stood guarded in the jailhouse window, face a mask. He called out, smooth even now. "A disgruntled employee's story," he said. "Coached by, what shall we call you, mister?" "Valade?" A romantic sheriff Mercier lifted the ledger. "Coached by sums you wrote with your own hand." He turned to the judge. "If this is not conspiracy, I'll shave my mustache and call myself a banker." The crowd laughed too loud because relief makes people silly. The judge banged the table. "Order," he said. "Mr. Perrin's testimony corroborated by documents is sufficient. Mr. Vion will be transferred to the state for trial." Maëlle stepped to Armand then, in front of everyone, and took his bound hands. "And him?" she asked the judge. Silence fell like a curtain. The judge pursed his mouth. "Mister?" "Valade is still a convicted felon on other matters." "Which matters?" she pressed. "Surviving? Robbery," he recited. "Affray, evasion." He tapped his papers. "The sentence stands." Armand breathed out, long. 10 years still hung from his neck like a yoke. He looked at Maëlle and tried to pour a lifetime of words into a glance. She squeezed back with all the stubborn hope she had left. Then the shot came. A last desperate thing thrown by a man who had built his life out of them. A crack from the alley. Vion, somehow free of his guard for a breath, pistol in gloved hand. The bullet found Armand's side. He staggered. The crowd screamed. Sheriff Mercier fired, and Vion fell at last, silk blooming red, the day finally tired of his voice. Maëlle caught Armand as he sank, and the street that had watched so much pretended it had never seen blood before. "Stay," she begged. "Please, stay." They carried him to the schoolhouse again because it had become a place where life balanced on a desk. The bullet lodged deep. Father Pierre's hands trembled. Thibault held a lamp so low the flame licked his fingers. Sheriff Mercier stood sentinel at the door, face carved from something harder than wood. Outside, the town waited with the quiet you only hear when people pray under their breath without knowing how. Armand faded and clawed back. He had 1,000 things to say and no air for any of them. He found Maëlle's eyes and held them like a man gripping a cliff edge. "Listen," he whispered. "No," she said, "because that is what love says to death, even when it is rude." "I love you," he pushed, simple as a child, plain as bread. "I would ride this life again if it ended in you every time." Tears ran clean tracks. "It doesn't end," she lied. He smiled with half his mouth and made her lie a promise by believing it. The judge came to the door, hat in his hands. "Mr. Valad," he said softly, "in light of the events I can petition—" "Keep your paper," Armand murmured. "Use it to bind the right men." The judge nodded, shame like a bruise on his cheek. Thibault gripped Armand's shoulder. "I owe you," he said. "You owe her," Armand corrected without heat. "You pay by living in a way that makes her proud to admit she knows your name." Night folded over the town. Crickets started because crickets do not wait for men. Armand's breath grew shallow. Father Pierre began a prayer that he hoped was big enough. Maëlle pressed her forehead to Armand's and told him about the sea again, about cliffs and gulls and a wind that smells like salt instead of dust. He listened and found the edge of the story where a man can step off and not fall, but float. "Don't be afraid," she said, returning his words from the gallows, paying them back with interest. He exhaled, long and slow. Everyone held the last inch of breath, as if they could keep it in the room by will alone. He made one more sound, more sigh than word. "Stay." It was not a command. It was a benediction for those who would. Then his chest stilled, and the room learned how loud a quiet can be. Father Pierre crossed himself and wept. Thibault set the lamp down, because his hands were shaking now. Sheriff Mercier's head bowed, and a man who had spent a life telling other people where to stand lost his place for a moment. Maëlle closed Armand's eyes and kissed the place between his brows where worry had lived. She did not cry at first. She watched the door, daring death to try the handle again. They buried him on the ridge where time grows between stones and the wind says names until it wears them smooth. The town followed, quiet, hats held, shame and gratitude tangled. Sheriff Mercier spoke few words. He had spent them all in the schoolhouse, but each landed like a fence post. "He did wrong," he said. Then he did right. Many of us will need longer lives than he had to manage, the same. Father Pierre prayed in a voice that sounded like a man talking to a friend he hopes might still answer. Thibault brought a simple marker, carved rough because his hands weren't made for fine work yet. He put it in the ground himself. "Armand Valad," it read, "loved." He looked at Maëlle, waiting for her to tell him he had overstepped. She touched the stone. "It's the only thing that matters," she said. The wind agreed. In town, the judge wrote long letters to the state, and for once paperwork would be a kind of justice. Vian's body went east on a wagon that looked strangely humble for a man who had spoken like a king. Stories grew because stories always do. Some said Armand had been a devil made soft by a schoolmistress. Others said he had been a saint made tough by a hard world. Children drew his hat on slates and asked who decides when a man has paid enough. Maëlle returned to the schoolhouse after a week, eyes red, voice steady. She taught fractions to boys who wanted gunfights, and girls who wanted rooms with windows and quiet. She told them every number has a remainder, that what's left over matters. At dusk, she climbed to the ridge and sat by the grave, book in hand. She read to him because he had asked her to write, and this was writing turned out loud. Sometimes she read poetry from a thin volume her mother loved. Sometimes she read receipts because life is made of them too. Sometimes she said nothing and listened to the wind, which knows more stories than any person and shares them only with those who sit long enough. When winter came, Frost traced the letters on the marker and made them new each morning. Sheriff Mercier's wound healed slow. He walked the town with his badge duller and his eyes clearer. Thibault stopped bringing flowers he couldn't afford and started bringing soup to boys who had none. The town learned to tell truth more quickly. The train learned to whistle softer when it passed the school. And on a night when the stars were sharp enough to cut, Maëlle felt the first flutter that said something else was on its way. Spring slid a green thumb under the door and pushed. Maëlle stood on the ridge under a sky that looked newer than most and held a small bundle wrapped in blue. The child slept with his mouth open in wonder, as if the world had told him a good joke. She touched his cheek with one finger. Outlaw, she whispered, a name from her mother's stories. You will know your father's name, and you will not have to carry it like a stone. Sheriff Mercier climbed the slope slower than he once had, set a hand on the marker, and then on the child's head. Bonjour, petite, he said, voice thick. Thibault stood a step back, hat in hands, the wind worrying his hair into honesty. He had papers in his pocket, official ones stamped and everything, saying the state had vacated Armand's sentence posthumously. Tidy words folding around a truth lived messily. He offered them to Maëlle, then stopped. Another time, he said. She nodded. We don't need paper to know how to live. They went down into town where the school door stood open, because learning doesn't wait for grief to finish. Maëlle pinned a ribbon on the wall above the blackboard. Blue, the color of skies that don't look like they're lying. This is for promises kept, she told the children. Not promises easy, promises right. She taught letters, beginning with A. Armand, alive, after. When the bell rang, she stood alone for a minute and let the empty room hold her. I will build a life you would have liked, she said to the air, and meant it like a contract. At sundown, she returned to the ridge, as she did most days, and told Eloy a story while he watched her mouth and tried to make sense of sound. She spoke of a man who had lived like the weather. Wild sometimes, gentle often, dangerous when cornered, and who had learned at the end to be still so others could breathe. She spoke of a town that had traded gossip for courage. She spoke of a badge that had learned humility, and a deputy who had learned love's older brother, duty. She spoke of herself, and how love had not saved her from pain but had given her a way through it. The wind rose and fell, a giant sleeping. Somewhere a coyote called, and another answered. The world continued, which is its own kind of mercy. She laid the baby's hand against the stone. Your father paid a price, she said. We will spend it well. She set a small toy horse on the grave, cedar smooth under her thumb. The first he had carved for a school step, remade for a son. She smiled then, not huge, not forced. Real. A woman who had moved through fire and found a place on the other side where the ground held. As the first stars pricked the dark, Maëlle lifted her eyes and felt the strange lightness that comes when a story finishes the way it must. She cried for the first time since the schoolhouse night, and the tears were not knives but rain on thirsty ground. When she was done, she pressed her palm flat to the stone. Don't be afraid, she whispered, returning his blessing to the earth. Then she gathered Eloy close, turned toward town, and walked down the path. Behind her, time nodded in the wind. Ahead, windows brightened one by one, and the bell of Sainte Madeleine rang the hour the way it always had, sure, steady, and full of the small courage it takes to keep going.